you all very much for being here again. I want to begin with a basic statement, which is I don't know where I am. And you might think, okay, that's an appropriate comment for an ancient and doddering person. But it actually gets to some fairly basic ideas of what we do in religion and what we do in a church like St. Andrew's. And it raises a whole lot of questions that I would not have thought of a year and a half ago, but which have since become very, very central to thinking about religion, practice of religion. And the question is, where are we right now? Okay. And so we would say, for example, imaginatively, we are in a discussion group, we are in a forum, we are in a conversation. I'm looking at people, I'm seeing people doing things, I'm seeing Julia building a fine megalithic monument, and we're all in the same room. Of course, we're not. We're in our separate houses, we're in separate chairs, and we're before screens. And that's where a lot of us have spent a lot of the last year. Here's an interesting question. What do we lose when we try and pursue a religious activity or a social activity like this? In what ways is it not the same? I just give you a hypothetical, purely hypothetical. Just suppose that we knew that the life of St. Andrew's would have to be carried out indefinitely through virtual means without physical presence. And my suggestion is that we could not do it, certainly not in any kind of recognizable form. As we said last week, there are many, many great uses of virtual services and virtual presentations and so on. Wonderful. And I hope they continue indefinitely. But I'm going to suggest that there are certain core things we do which demand physical presence, participation, and a sense of place. So here's my basic problem. As human beings, we're very prone to imagining ourselves as almost detached from our bodies. You know, have you ever used the phrase "my body"? It's a ridiculous phrase because it suggests that there's an I or a thing or something which is separate from the body. As if it's floating 3 feet above you. We're good at imagining that, and that sense of consciousness is very central to the origins of religion. It gives us this idea that there must be a part of us which continues indefinitely. I don't want to get into, if you like, the theology of the soul, but we're very good at trying to detach from the body and the physical, but we don't do it, and we can't do it indefinitely. We do a couple of things. We have to have community. We have to be physically present with people, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. And we also do something, and I'm going to use a word which is maybe sounds like a very loaded and even negative word, which is a lot of things we do are ritual. And we do ritual in all sorts of aspects of life, but particularly in religion. And you might say there, well, you know, I'm not a ritualistic person. Well, sort of, we are. Think about it, for example, when you go to church physically, think of the number of physical, bodily related things that you do, which are quite apart from participating in the actual service. You go to church, you go physically. You enter the church, you enter that different space with its different vibes, its different atmosphere. You enter into a community. And we're remarkably ritualistic about this. You know, just a trivia point. I saw a church leaflet the other day from the local Roman Catholic church in State College, and a fine, thriving church. And what interested me was they had a report of the money they brought in the previous week. And I think 90 or 95% of that was envelopes, as opposed to credit card and paying online. It's very old world, but the reason is people are used to the ritual of putting money in an envelope, putting it in a collection plate, when it makes no sense as a practical way of doing things. We are ritualistic beings, and we do things through ritualistic acts. Last time I used an analogy, which I'd like to develop a little bit. There's a wonderful music group, classical music, called the Kronos Quartet. Penn State University is has been doing a program with them, which is called, and I like the title, Up Close and Virtual. So it's a virtual program that was recorded. You can stream it on your television. The Kronos Quartet is going to be wonderful as ever, and I won't be watching it because it's an absolutely total different experience watching something on a screen from being there. And I think I really kind of work at this, and I think, so what is the difference? What is the difference between watching something there on a screen and physically being there? I would commit atrocious crimes in order to get live tickets. I'm not going to bother to switch on a screen to watch the same act, even with superb audio and superb close-ups and so on. Why? Here's an important comment. We as human beings are programmed to community and to being with groups of people, and that goes back, hundreds of thousands of years in our evolution. And we think at the moment, I am seeing you, but think what you miss when you're actually in a group of people. And think of the ways in which you know that somebody is in the same room as you, whether or not you can see them. We have all these tokens that we get of hearing and smell and all these different features, which mean that we are in a place and we are in a collective group. And whether you are seeing the Kronos Quartet or whether you are in a church congregation, you are in a community in such a way that, and I throw this open for discussion, is it possible to practice a religion in anything like the terms we know of religion alone, or in a single family or household? Or is it possible to do so indefinitely without that kind of physical presence? And different people will have different things to say about that. And it might be that in future, something like we're doing at the moment, or something like a stream service, will be much more the future of churches. Possibly it will. But I can only suggest that would be a very different phenomenon. Now, I use this word ritual, and as I say, you might say, well, that's not my tradition, I don't do ritual. Think of a very non-ritual tradition, like, for example, Baptists, or Pentecostals, or whatever. They do not do rituals in the sense of they don't wear robes and they don't use incense, but they do follow practices which are the same week by week. You are with a group, you sing together, you gather together. Singing together is a way of creating physical community, physical presence. You are sharing activities with other people. And if all of us right now, please let's not try this experiment, if all of us right now try to sing the same song, it would be an interesting experience, but would it create community in anything like the same way? There are sort of speculations about how religion emerged. And there are scholars, there are anthropologists who will tell you that what happened was early societies started doing things together, and they had made common sounds, and they made similar movements, and they made ritual movements and dance. And over time, they started telling stories about why they were doing that. And those became myths, those became stories. And then you built creed and doctrine and orthodoxy on top of that. But as human beings, we have hundreds of thousands of years of that sense of shared action and shared ritual, which makes us anything like what we are. Here's another example. I have done quite a lot of writing through the years about the idea of liturgy and what happens in liturgy. And I'm going to suggest that quite a lot of what we do in a church like St. Andrew's, by no means that, relies on certain principles that can only really be done physically. And so one of them is liturgy brings us all together. It creates community in different ways, and there can be all sorts of physical acts that we do for that. You know, whether you have like a procession or singing together. Think about it. What do you lose when you just sit and listen, even to a magnificent choir, as opposed to singing together and sharing that action in one place? Liturgy is also intended to take us from here to a higher here. And I'll give you an example of that. It's interesting if you look at the history of the liturgy that we know in the Catholic Church, the Anglican tradition, and how we move up in the course of the service. So we start off with reading that appeals to one part of the brain. Then we move to another level, and then another level. And then we have that absolutely key moment, which is where we or the choir sing, "Holy, holy, holy," which is the moment, which is the hymn traditionally associated with actually being in heaven. And that's the point where in most traditions, many traditions, you kneel because you are in a specially sacred place. So liturgy is a brilliant piece of, and I'm not afraid to use the word, theater, of performance. It is meant to take you together on a journey. And one thing I find very difficult is if I'm in a group of people, whether it's 3 people or 300, I can identify with that journey very simply. If I'm sitting watching a screen, I just can't. I can observe what a priest is doing, but it's something that I'm observing as if I'm watching a television program about anything particular, even if it's happening in real time. It's not real, so to speak. That's why, incidentally, I was saying last time, so much of what we do in church or around church matters, even if it isn't part of the formal religious ritual. And I mentioned things like coffee hours and parish picnics. How do you make a sense of family or extended family if it's not a bunch of people who sit down together? So show me a church where you don't have a coffee hour and a parish picnic, and I'll show you a troubled church. So it's another form of physical presence of materiality. You can, just as an exercise, think this through. Think of when you would physically go to church. Just think through the rituals or the actions that you participate in, which and just think of them, if you like, second by second. I go in here, I shake hands with people. For anyone who's a younger person, shaking hands was a ritual that used to be practiced in the early 21st century before we abandoned that. think of the things that we do. Some of those rituals are deliberately designed to promote that kind of solidarity or community. And frankly, they don't work. I never, for instance, found much joy in the idea of exchanging the peace at church, because the shaking hands just seemed such an artificial gesture. Have you ever seen spouses in church shake hands with each other? And you thought, that's weird. That's strange. They're trying to promote something, but there's already so much going on, whether it's saying hello as you park the car, that is part of the physical presence, the physical experience of going to church. As you work through, I just mentioned this, by the way, something I have done. I put together a number of things about this liturgy idea. And if anyone wants to email me, I can bounce that to them, and whatever you make of it, I have my kind of laws of liturgy. But here's a question that I would really like your opinions on. Of what we do in church, what cannot be done in front of a screen in this kind of virtual setting? In the past few months, our communion service has used that lovely prayer of Alphonsus Liguori, which is the spiritual communion, which, and I paraphrase, says, I can't be here physically, but make it as if I am here with this communion. And it's a lovely thing, but it does make the basic assumption that no, you are not here. The word real comes from the word for thing. It assumes material. It assumes a materiality. And for me, one of the great things about the Anglican tradition and the Catholic tradition is that they combine different ways of using presence and participation. If you have something which is entirely read and spoken and verbal, that appeals to one part of the brain, and you can absolutely do that with a screen. But that's not what we are. And for me, the great religious services are ones that bring in five senses. I just give you an example. When I was teaching religious studies at Penn State, I used to go over to the Palmer Museum with my classes. And one thing you'll see there is an Orthodox processional cross, which these days is shown in a plastic case. And if you look at something like that, you realize it's meant to be a five-sense experience. If you see it in a plastic case, you're seeing it like a butterfly with a pin through it that's dead. If it's in the plastic case, you're not seeing the five-sense experience. How are you meant to see this? You have to imagine it's meant to be something that is in a dark room with lights reflecting off the gold cross. You're meant to be surrounded by people. What they always say about Orthodox churches is that there are no seats or benches, but that's fine. You can just lean on the person next to you because they're going to be so full. You are surrounded by a wall of scent, of incense. You're surrounded by those tastes, and you are also overwhelmed by music. And that's what makes a dead thing inside a glass case a thing which is living and which in many ways provides a gate to the supernatural. Different people are going to have their different ideas about what is a sacred thing, what carries them into another universe. But I'm going to suggest to you, it assumes a physicality and a physical presence that you can never get even with the finest online services. So as Kevin said at the beginning, I use this model of the P's, the 5 P's, and I forget them myself sometimes, but what they basically are is presence and participation, physicality, a sense of being in a place that is a sacred place, however they define it, whether you're in, the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, or you're in a church like St. Andrew's, where prayer has been valid, and where you are surrounded by all these symbols that are meant to direct you to the divine. It assumes sacredness. Different things will work on different people. Just to give an example, I remember some years ago seeing one of the most powerful examples of somebody being reduced to awe by religion. I was visiting Palmyra in upper New York State, which is sacred to Mormons. And you can see the sacred grove there where reportedly Joseph Smith received this great angelic vision. And basically it's the foundation of the Mormon church. To me, that story means nothing. It is not a holy story to me. It's very interesting historically. But you could see people wandering around absolutely overcome and weeping by the sense of, surely God is in this place. And not for a second am I trying to, make fun of what those people thought. I'm just saying it's not my experience. Different things work for different people. But here's the thing. If you are in a community or a family, then certain things will speak to you as they will not speak to people outside the family. In a church like St. Andrew's, we have the things that that speak to us, that stained glass, that monument, that place where something happened. And there's an absolute difference between being there and seeing a picture of it. There's a story I always like about this idea of, if you like, physicality. Back in the 19th century, there was a great woman called Margaret Fuller, who was who's a transcendentalist, and she was famous for these kind of long mystical speeches she would give about the transcendent and the spiritual. And at one point, she ended one of those speeches by saying basically, but she acknowledged that she had to live in the physical universe, or as she said, I accept the universe, to which Thomas Carlyle replied, God, she'd better. And I think that when we are looking at the sense of physicality in religion, in a church like St. Andrew's, this is why I am desperately pleading to get back to some sort of physical presence in the church again. As churches think of how they are going to balance physical presence versus virtual, I would quote Thomas Carlyle, God, they'd better, or else they would be losing so much of what, in my view, is essential to religion. So please, do not think when I'm talking about this, I'm saying it has been a mistake doing all these things over the last year. Usually there's no alternative whatever. Do not think I'm saying that we haven't learned useful things that can be done in future in terms of the virtual, and that's going to be more and more as years go by. But what I'm saying is that religion, spiritual, in anything like the way we have imagined it through human history, which is not a phrase I often use, assumes the physical, and that is not that is not negotiable. If we want to move to some whole new thing, that's fine. But if we want any connection with the past, we have to think of that sense of the spiritual in the physical. And if we're in a church that is sacramental and liturgical, we honestly don't have any option at all.